Coming up this week on Breaking Badness, today we discuss the domain event. There's been a 60% increase in scam domain registrations targeting holiday shoppers. Next up, Tag 112, You're It. The Chinese state-sponsored threat group Tag 112 compromised two Tibetan websites to deliver Cobalt Strike malware. And of course, our fun game, Gold Guidance and Grievances. With that, Breaking Badness is next. Welcome to Breaking Badness, episode number 196, recorded on November 18th, 2024. I'm your co-host, Callie, evasive panda express fensel. With me is co-host Tim. Trust me, I'm a chatbot helming. And last but not least, Taylor, you can lead a horse to a watering hole attack, but you can't make them drink. Wilkes Pierce. Welcome, everybody.
I've heard that about horses.
Heard that too.
Not very susceptible to it. No,
That's good for horses that they're not very susceptible to that.
they don't
I
get them
didn't-
all.
It's something about their species.
I believe I heard a statistic somewhere that said no horse has ever clicked on a malicious link. That's pretty good.
What about Mr. Ed?
If there had been malicious links during Mr. Ed's time, it might be a different story.
That's true. Oh, poor Mr.
I
Ed.
think he'd destroy the
Ed,
mouse in the process, though, on the very first one.
Yeah, they have to build a special horse-proof mouse.
The iron mouse.
Yeah,
R.I.P. Mr. Ed. While we're recording this, it's not quite the holiday season. We are,
Some people think it is,
some people, yeah,
but I'm with you. It's not quite.
it's not quite, but we're just like, we're barreling towards it. And by the time this releases, we will be fully enmeshed in the holiday season and all that comes with that. Before we go into some bad news, what are you looking forward to?
Playing my holiday records.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I often pick up a few new items of holiday vinyl throughout the year. If you're a thrift store vinyl person, like that is a category that is heavily represented.
I am a thrift store vinyl person, but I mostly want it for display purposes. I like the artwork on a record cover. So like I frame them, I put them out throughout the house and it looks nice. Like it's nice artwork. I don't really care how beat the record is. I'm
But do you
purely-
have a record player, in fact?
I honestly I don't actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm in it for the graphic design.
Okay. I got some of it is really good. I made a fake vintage, like 60s vintage album cover for my better half one time. And it's too long a story to go into right now, but I'll show you. I'll send you a picture of it one time. I think
Please
it came out pretty vintagey looking.
Good. Yeah, I need to see that because I am into all of that. But yeah, I've got Nat King Cole, got Beach Boys, Christmas, Bing Crosby, Johnny Mathis. I've got them all.
You send me a picture of your wall of those, and I'll send you a picture of the phony one I made. How's that?
Deal. Tay, what are you looking forward to?
I like to cook, so Thanksgiving is a lot of fun.
All
Oh,
right.
you like to cook?
That's true. Yes, I enjoy it greatly. I don't know why.
I do. I like doing it too.
I like doing it.
It's fun to sit down and start and finish a thing and be like, hey, here you go.
Now, do you like doing all of the different phases? Do you like the throughout? Do you make the desserts also, or do you like focus on one particular part? Or
Sweet tooth person. I let other folks handle the desserts, but I'll be rocking the mashed potatoes. I'm in charge of the turkey again. And yeah. Oh, green bean casserole also on my plate.
Man, people are entrusting you with a lot of things.
Yeah. A couple of them are really young and they don't have any choice.
That's
yeah,
the
they
word.
have to entrust you.
That's how you do that.
But
Very
they,
good.
they develop a good love for gravy. And then last year we invented the fried Thanksgiving potato balls.
That sounds good.
Recipe required.
That kind of sounds like
like
something you get at a brewery. Like they
I
would
had a
serve
bunch of
that.
leftovers. Yeah, I had a bunch of leftover mashed potatoes. I had a bunch of leftover gravy. I froze the gravy into little gravy pucks and then wrapped up potato balls around like turkey and gravy and then fried them. And they're pretty good.
If you need to get that out there, you could start a phenomenon here.
Yeah, I took pictures. I'll get some pictures.
Yeah,
For y'all to take a look.
I could see this going viral. This may be a big deal.
Coming
You
up
heard it
on
here first on Breaking Badness.
They
Breaking
were
Bad.
awesome. They were really good.
Yeah, I bet they were. I kind of want to
very
try
good.
that now.
Deep fried and filled with gravy. It's okay.
You just said a lot of good things
Don't have too many.
strung together. Do you think that would work in an air fryer?
I could do an A and B test. I don't have an air fryer, but I could find someone with one and hand them some of, because you end up with a bunch of these little frozen kind of potato dumpling things almost.
This is sounding great. Yeah, I don't have an air fryer either, but we will.
I have a combo microwave thing that does more than microwaving, and air fryer is one of its things. However, I do not know how that compares to a standalone air fryer. And usually the standalone thing is better than the combo thing.
We throw around the word air fryer, and to me, it feels a little bit like jumbo shrimp. It feels, can you fry something with air? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's a fryer.
Yeah, what makes it frying at that point?
Dry cleaner. What are they like? Seinfeld said there's got to be a liquid back there.
Okay, you know what? Have either of you ever seen the Red Green Show?
No.
It's a Canadian comedy show and very funny. At least
Holiday thing?
no, it's despite that name, no, it's not specifically holiday focused. But what the guy on that show would absolutely do, which I think I'm actually now curious about trying, would be to take your little potato guys and use a heat gun and do them with the heat gun.
I have a heat gun.
Right there you need like a stainless steel slab or something like that.
Okay.
The fryer works great. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about for like your air fryer A/B test, but also just to do it in the most red greenish sort of way. Like on that show, he was constantly coming up with different ways of doing things, which were usually pretty Rube Goldberg-ish. He was like a do-it-yourselfer type guy. And like the one I saw most recently was in the truck with the roll-up windows. He used the electric mixer, eject the beaters from it, and then jam that thing over the window roller, and boom, now he's got an electric window roller for his pickup truck. Very convenient, and no problem with it being 110-volt powered or anything like that. Actually, it might have been a battery mixer. I can't remember.
Wow.
It's total silliness, but it's
going to electrocute you for touching it the wrong way. No problem.
These are all fantastic holiday things.
I sense we're being pulled on task.
I think we got to give the people what they came here for. But I do think this is a great opportunity for another spinoff, Breaking Bad cooking.
We never actually do the spinoffs.
No, we don't. We're very busy. But in addition to all these good things, there's unfortunately some negativity that comes with the holiday season, and that is the 60% increase in scam domain registrations targeting holiday shoppers, which is in our wheelhouse. We've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before regarding some research that we did on some retail focused scams. But Tim, how normal is it to see an increase in domain registrations around the holiday season versus other times of the year when maybe shopping's not as prevalent?
I dug into this a little bit because I was curious about what I might see in Iris Investigate, a product of Domain Tools, which may or may not have a relationship with this podcast, which you may or may not be able to see on Taylor and my screens. Anyhow, I looked at one of the biggest retailers in there, and this is fairly consistent with, I've looked at this in the past. I did not see actually a really big bump in these last couple of months. As a matter of fact, I saw more registered domains in the second quarter than in the third quarter. So who knows? I think these big retailers, and we've talked about various kinds of retail scams. Callie, you wrote a killer blog about that with the American Girl scam, right, a while ago, which isn't a store, it's a brand. But these stores get targeted all the time. It's honestly, retail scamming is a year-round hobby for some people. I guess it's a year-round illicit income for some people, let's be honest. But I think there's probably it's fair to say there may be across the board a mild ramp up this time of year. I will give the benefit of the doubt to what they say in the article that we're connecting to. Now, the article says that 60% of the 4,000 odd domains that they looked at were newly registered and active. However, they didn't define what time frame constitutes newly registered and active that I saw anyway. And so that makes it a little harder to know. Is this, but they're saying within the past 90 days. So maybe that's the time span they're counting, if it's anywhere within that 90 days. So I think the big news here isn't news really, which is that retailers get targeted by scammers putting up fake retail named websites. And it's a thing. And every year, if you have a fake retail themed website, then Black Friday and the holidays are really good times to put out phishing lures related to those.
Yeah, for sure. Like you had mentioned, like newly created domains versus older domains. And in this article, some of the domains that are listed are actually years old.
Yeah.
Does it matter for our listeners that might not know if it's newer or older regarding the potential for malicious activity?
Domain freshness doesn't really affect its efficacy. It's not like food where it starts to go stale and then becomes gradually poisonous as it gets older. That's not true for domains, as it turns out. And so, if the domain was registered with malicious intent, but somehow was not caught earlier on, it could still be doing malicious things. And of course, a domain name is just a method of pointing a computer to a server. And so you can change what's on that server all the time. So you could have an older domain that could have a newer set of tooling on it to capture credentials or whatever it is that they're trying to do with said domain. So I think the fact that some of them are older, if they're still active, or if they have the potential, if they haven't been taken down and therefore have the potential to become newly active, then they could be as dangerous as the newest ones. And let's not forget that one of the things that seems to be going on at some level, this is a bit hard to quantify, but anecdotally we're observing this, is that sometimes malicious actors will register domains and then sit on them for a while because it's become increasingly popular over the years to not trust young domains, and for good reason. So, they're aging them like fine wines and leaving them on the shelf for a while. And so that may be some of what we see going on here too. In fact, the tranche of domains that are newly registered may not get used entirely. Again, it would also depend on what they mean by active, but I assume it probably means resolving, because when you're looking at 4,000 domains or 6,000 domains or whatever it is, it's pretty hard to go through all of those and see from a human interaction perspective, are they active, quote unquote. But if they're resolving in DNS, then that may qualify as active. For us in Iris Investigate, we'll call it active if it's resolving in DNS. So they are not necessarily more dangerous if they're newer.
And what terms are bad actors using regarding these domains? And
Oh, well,
do you think
yeah, this is sorry,
yeah. Well,
continue.
I was gonna ask, like, do legit brands use these terms as well, or is that something that you wouldn't see coming from a legit brand?
Yeah, so the terms that tend to be the most risky are really wonderfully the terms that ironically have to do with things like security. And if you monitor domain registrations that contain words like secure and update and so forth, they're filthy. Like, you see a lot of really bad stuff in
Mhm.
domains that contain themes like that. Now, if you are targeting retailers, then especially going toward the holiday season, then certainly some of the words that you might see in those will have to do with sales, sale, Black Friday, discount, savings, whatnot, things like that. And if you're a malicious actor and you want to register a domain, attaching other words to the retailer that you're targeting means there's a higher chance that you can actually use the retailer name without having to do a typo like a O1 instead of an L or something like that. You're not going to register Walmart.com unless they let that registration lapse, which would be pretty big news, but I'm pretty sure they're never going to do that. But if you did, and I'm making this up, but if you did Walmart-discount-Black-Friday-2024.com, then you can probably do that and spell Walmart the proper way, which may increase the odds that people are going to fall for it. And so combining words is a trick that you will see. It's this one weird trick that you'll see malicious registrants do all the time, because then they don't have to resort to typo type names that could be more easily spotted by the wary consumer.
One area of maliciousness that was mentioned in this article that was interesting to me was the fraudulent chatbot support, which I admit is a newer area of fraud that I've just learned about. For our listeners that also might not know, does this mean bad actors are infiltrating a legitimate website's chat support functionality, or are they doing it a different way?
Yeah, so that would be the scariest thing. And I do not see evidence that's happening in any widespread fashion. What it looks like more often is happening is that simply there will be some kind of a phishing lure. And then if you click on the link in the phishing lure, it takes you to a chatbot page where there'll be an interactive thing that's, oh, yeah, I'm from insert retailer here and I want to help you lock in your savings or whatever it might be. And then they'll harvest credentials, credit cards, stuff like that. So I'm not aware of a legit site having specifically the chatbot function hijacked and then used for malicious purposes. Now, having said that, I can't say that hasn't happened. It may be that there are stories of that happening, but when I did a little research in preparation for this into what fraudulent chatbots look like, it's really what I found was that it's the consequence of a phishing lure. It's the next stage, and it's not. It's on malicious infrastructure. It's not on compromised legit infrastructure.
I see. Okay. The top brands listed in this article that are likely to be impersonated really come as no surprise: Walmart, Amazon, Target. Do smaller brands need to worry as much about impersonation?
I think anybody is potentially fair game to this. The bigger a draw you are, the more eyeballs you're going to get, the more attractive you are to malicious actors because they're just going to tend to notice that. And Tim's awesome vintage drums and audio equipment shop in Seattle, which doesn't actually exist, but it would be fun if it did, just isn't going to get as many eyeballs as Nike or
Mhm.
Amazon or Target or any of the biggest retailers in the world. So if you are, it could be that you could occasionally see a very targeted campaign against a smaller business. I don't want to in any way say that couldn't happen. And we definitely recommend that folks keep an eye on domain registrations that contain their brands or things that are adjacent to their brands. I think that's always a good practice. But I think what you're going to see as far as the biggest scams out there, of course, they're going to be pointing to the biggest names. And so, yes, everybody should, let's put it in two ways, right? If you're a consumer, odds are that what's going to be targeting you is something for one of the biggest brands in the world. If you are a small business, on the other hand, you should be monitoring for things that are imitating your name because something could happen that could be harmful to you. It may not make the evening news, but it could be a big deal for your business. It just depends on which of those lenses you're looking at it through.
And it could also be a form of flattery.
Yeah, that's right. They do say that about imitation, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
It's so easy
Um,
to forget that in this business we're in.
Smaller brands, it's actually trickier because the pattern of badness around them doesn't quite exist. They fly under the radar when they do get spoofed. It's like if someone registers a domain that has Microsoft in it, everybody's going to see it. As soon as it hits the certificate transparency logs, or depending on where how public and loud they are with it. But those kind of smaller brands can go under the radar for a while, or you might not even. I've seen instances where you don't even need an online presence, where they can see that you exist and start to imitate you even without that.
yeah, and like in that same vein, it might not even have to be like a smaller like mom and pop shop. It could be like a sub brand of a bigger brand. Like we were talking about with the American Girl example, like that
Yep.
is under the Mattel umbrella. So
Yep.
it's like
There's a
you
lot
have
of surface area there.
yeah, it's like you have
Definitely.
to be like these organizations have to be mindful of their sub brands. Like even if it is thing where you might think people aren't paying as much attention to them based on sales, you can make the argument like for if we stay in the American Girl example, oh, they're not as popular as they once were. Like who's gonna want to imitate them? It's just there's still a desire for that
That's right.
collective. Yeah. So
That's
it's
right.
still something you have to monitor.
If there's a sizable market niche, then yeah. And you're right, Taylor, like people who are keeping an eye on certificate transparency logs or new registrations or whatnot, things like that, they can't be looking for everything all the time. But this goes to another point that we like to make with folks when we're talking about keeping an eye on potentially malicious registrations. There are certain brands or companies or suppliers or tools or whatnot that affect just about all of us. And here we think about, you gave the example of Microsoft. That's it. Like big tech companies and so forth. Big banks are another example. Like you might not be that tech company, but it could be a really bad day if somebody does a spoof Microsoft login page that one of your employees falls for. If you happen to be a Microsoft shop, that could be a bad day for you, right? So there are a bunch of large names that are worth keeping an eye on from this perspective as well. And make no mistake, of course, security vendors are aware of this. And I think there are a lot of great web blocking tools and spam blocking tools and so forth that do keep an eye on these kind of things, but stuff can slip by as we go.
For sure. So, Tim, how do brands protect themselves regarding brand impersonation, these fraudulent domains? How do they stay ahead of the game?
They should really just take a page out of the book of the IRS. And you all knew I was going to say that, right? No,
No.
what the IRS does every year around tax time, and they do it year round, but especially around tax time here in the US, is they will say the IRS is never going to send you a text message with a link to log in and do something with your tax return. Retailers could choose to do something similar where they might say, look, this is what our ads and so forth will look like, and here's what they won't look like. And if you see something that looks like the won't category, you should not click on it. Now, I don't think I've seen any of these big companies doing that, but that is one option that they could choose to do and say, we're only going to put out notices of sales and so forth, or email our customers or whatnot in these particular ways. And if it doesn't look like that, now you could also say, cool, that gives a blueprint, a perfect blueprint for a spammer who's good at imitating the one legitimate way. You have to be aware, but for certain methods, like the IRS is never going to send you a text. It could be that big retailers could decide we're not going to use text. So if you get a text that says it's from us, it's not from us. That can be one option. Certainly keeping an eye on registrations and doing domain takedowns is costly and time consuming and whatnot, but it's also a thing that is important to do sometimes. And I think most of the biggest brands in the world are doing this and also defensively registering. Sometimes I will see domains that are registered maliciously that are targeting a major company, and they're really not very obscure as far as the correctly spelled company name and then one add-on word that's not a real obscure word. So I would say in cases like that, if I were that company, like a multi-billion dollar company, what's a domain registration cost? $10 a year, $20 a year, something like that. You could do quite a lot of those for like less than you pay for napkins in your break rooms around the world and potentially save some scamming. So defensive registrations, I think, are a cheap way to head off some of what could be easily missed by unwary consumers in terms of domains.
I agree, but it's so defensive registration, such a slippery slope.
It is.
Before you have this portfolio of thousands of things that you never wanted.
Absolutely. But you could probably come up with a reasonable list of 100 terms or something like that that get attached to your name, and you go ahead and do those. Yes, and some choice there and use it. Absolutely, that could happen. But I think by and large, I think there's a place for doing those defensive registrations as well.
Do you think that's where maybe AI can come in?
I don't think AI should come in at all. Oh, wait,
Oh,
that's a
right.
different
Well,
podcast.
do you think there's any validity to using Copilot, ChatGPT for these organizations to say what would be the most commonly spoofed iterations of our domain that we should consider preemptively purchasing?
That's an interesting idea. I think the question would be on what training material is the chatbot going to make its decision to give the answer to you? And does it have, for example, if it had access to all of the domain registrations over the last N years and could identify patterns in those and give you an answer to that, that might be a useful answer. But the chatbots don't have access to that information directly. And so I'd be a little wary. It would be an interesting curiosity thing to do, but I'm not sure that's something you'd necessarily take to the bank.
Okay, that's fair. I like that answer. Thank you, Tim, for walking us through this. I would be interested in learning more about what you found out about Q2 and why that's a particular bump for the retail sector. But maybe
Let me make it clear. It wasn't a big bump. It was just that there were mildly more in Q2 than there were in Q3.
yeah.
So if you're thinking about them ramping up to do a bunch of holiday themed stuff, we didn't necessarily see it
Okay.
in that respect. But it wasn't a spike. It was just like it was a little bit higher.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We appreciate you walking us through that. We'll take the time now to go through our hoodie rating. Again, if you're a newer listener, what we like to do after discussing our articles is assign a hoodie rating to the article. If you picture a stereotypical hacker in a hoodie, we're basically denoting how significant was this particular attack, based from 1 not being so bad to 10 being, oh my gosh, please scream and run around in circles. So, Tim, since we heard from you, Taylor, we will start with your assessment.
I think coming into the holiday season, knowing we're going to get an influx of phishing attacks and campaigns that just because we have a lot of folks being driven online to go buy, right? Like, hey, here's sales or here's right? Like it's all over the place in the marketing ecosystem to get folks to do this. So then you can just slide in your lures in amongst all that noise. We've known that for, it's not particularly new, but the volume of it, I think the number of ways that we're targeted with these things now is the not only the volume of the pure volume of the domains and the attacks of this going up, but the kind of our own personal surface area goes up across all the different social media things folks interact with, the online media they consume. It all kind of ties together into making folks a little more vulnerable than they ought to be. So I'm going to give it 2.13 hoodies.
Excellent. Tim, do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I'm in the same neighborhood. I think what could change this, and we'll see if it does, but it's less about the domains and more about whether there's a novel and very effective technique that happens to use these domain names as part of the chain. That would make it more risky. But what we're talking about in the story here really is just seeing large numbers and maybe a rise in seasonal rise in the domains that are spoofing these things. I agree with Taylor. I don't think it's a giant security risk, especially from a SOC defender's perspective. From a consumer perspective, you have to have your guard up. I think there's a gradual boost in people's savvy to these things. Consumer awareness, people having their shields up against these scams. I think that's gotten a little bit better, but obviously that means malicious actors are just trying to get more clever and get around that as well. Put me down for 3 hoodies.
Okay.
By the way, I would like to sell shirts or hoodies or something now that say, please run around and scream. Please run around in circles and scream. I think that'd be a pretty good shirt.
I think it would be too.
I'm almost certain my daughter would buy one.
I think we could do that. It's a very doable goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you walking us through that. And as always, we'll keep an eye on it. And if there's anything new, we'll share that with our audience. We're going to take a quick break, though. And when we come back, we are going to talk about our next story on tag 112. So stay tuned and we will be right back. All right. And we're back. Oh, we're back and JoJo's here.
Oh, always happy to see JoJo, official dog of Breaking Bad.
Our dog mascot.
You should never, ever apologize for making JoJo appear on Breaking Badness. This is a great thing about being on YouTube now, that people can see JoJo because she's the quietest dog in the world. So they're not going to hear her if they're just listening to the audio version.
No.
Unless the UPS truck shows up and then she'll bark for a treat. She heard me say she thought treats.
Obviously.
As an aside, we have the coolest postal carrier ever, and she leaves little treats for the dogs every day in the mailbox. There's a treat for each dog. So when they hear her come, they do get excited, but in a really happy way.
You get bills, dogs get treats.
That's right. Yeah.
What a great idea, though, for a postal worker to carry around treats,
Exactly.
make friends with all the dogs.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how you do it.
She's smart.
Bringing it back to cybersecurity, we are going to talk about this Chinese state-sponsored threat group, Tag 112. Is it Tag 112 or Tag 112? I've been saying it.
I like 112. I think that.
I like 112 as well.
Short.
But
I'm good with that. The judges will accept that.
Yeah, good. But I'm willing to be corrected. But yeah, we're going to talk about this group who compromised 2 Tibetan websites to deliver cobalt stripe malware. Very interesting. So the attacks described here, as I just mentioned, they're targeted at 2 Tibetan community websites, the Tibetan Post, and I'm so going to say this incorrectly, and I'm so sorry for that. Is it Gayumed Tantric University?
Your guess is as good as mine. Gayumed
The
Tantric
judges will
University.
accept that.
Okay.
With the proviso that
It's the second time that they've targeted the Tibetan Post. The Tibetan
Yeah.
Post.
Okay. So I was going to ask you, why these 2 targets? And it sounds like they've already attacked. It sounds like one is a newspaper and one is a university. Am I correct in that thinking?
Yeah, it's tough to see because the university one's fairly recently registered as well. So it's tricky to tell like the provenance of it. So we'll go with the recorded future, the InSeeks group take on all of these things, but also throw it out there that university website's also fairly new. Was it compromised? Is the whole thing a kayfabe? Was it all a farce? Who knows? The Tibet Post, though, has been around for some time and has been exploited in a similar way before. It's been targeted. You would think folks would be updating their Joomla instance a little more often, but not the case here for these two sites.
Fool me once, fool me twice. So how did the actors go about this attack?
Sure. So for both of these sites, they were deployed on a Joomla content management system, and Joomla is akin to a word of a kind of a framework for building a site, and the content management system underlying like the code in that management system had vulnerabilities in it that got patched. This is nothing. Joomla's fine. This is not like a, hey, Joomla is bad. That's an open source project that gets patched and is considered generally to be a little more aggressive about security than some of the other content management frameworks that are out there. So this is not a dunk on Joomla post or by any means, right? But they did find that the installs for Joomla had an exploit that they could take advantage of, and then decided to turn them into watering hole attacks. So they updated the JavaScript on the page with additional JavaScript that then checked to see if the incoming connection was from a Windows host, and if so, would then display a fake TLS, fake security error, or a fake certificate error on the page saying, hey, you've got to download this certificate to get this thing to work, which instead was actually a Cobalt Strike.
Okay.
Yeah, no, these are real sad trombones. These aren't making fun of people. Like, it sucks.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's the sad trombone of sincerity.
I think people appreciate the sad trombone of sincerity. Yeah, I know I do for sure. But Taylor, is there a reason to use Cobalt Strike versus another method, or why is Cobalt Strike preferred here?
It's free? No, no. Cobalt Strike is commercial software designed, I'm putting giant air quotes, designed for red teams. It's a malware framework that is in active development by a legitimate organization. Unfortunately, what happens with versions of this software is they end up getting cracked open and then used by malicious actors. So the concept behind Cobalt Strike is, hey, you could use this to be a red team and conduct penetration tests and to test your own environment. And for that purpose, I'm sure it's pretty darn useful. But the downside of releasing that stuff out into the world is that when the source code is cracked, it can then be leveraged in malicious ways that you have no control over. So Cobalt Strike is one of a few tools like this, but happens to be very popular. It's been out for a long time.
And this article actually mentioned there's a connection between tag 112 and tag 102, which is also known as invasive panda. Would you be able to share with our audience what those connections are?
Yeah, so it is thought that tag 112. Now we're using the recorded future terminology for all of this because that's where our reporting is coming from. So we'll go with their analysis here. So they've found tag 112 to be a subset of 102. So 102 seems to be the more advanced of the two groups. The thing is that we're also coming to this knowledge, or coming to this information with the backdrop of the releases of information about the Chinese kind of security industry. Earlier this year, there were dumps of information around the different companies that are contracted to perform these actions on behalf of the government there. We also now know that there are a few different groups from the recorded future side of the house. They see tag 102 as the more advanced of the two, having more custom malware frameworks, where tag 112 does more drive-by. They use Cobalt, right? They're using more off the shelf, as it were, off the rack malware instead of custom developed.
So what are some of the mitigations recommended that you can share with us?
Don't go to your favorite Tibetan educational website, or don't ever click a download from them. Obviously, block the IOCs that we see a lot. We bang the user education drum a lot, but it's it's tricky, right? Because hey, it looks like you need to download this thing. Google Chrome is telling you to do it, and then using the reporting here to go hunting for more C2 hosts and see what else might be compromised from a defender perspective.
Excellent. Thanks for walking us through that, Taylor. I appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and talk about our hoodie rating for this one. And because we just heard from you, we will kick it over to Tim for his hoodie rating first.
I would say in general, we're seeing chained together a number of kinds of tooling methods, et cetera, that are fairly familiar to us. That method of the certificate warning is clever. And I was thinking, boy, there are ways that they could play with this that might make it even a little bit more sneaky. I would say in general, let's go with 4 hoodies, which sadly I think is a number I use pretty often. But the reality is I don't, if we very narrowly focus this on these Tibetan sites, okay, that's not going to affect very many people. But I think the bigger picture here is this particular set of TTPs. And so that the set of TTPs and these APT groups from China, which are pretty widespread. So for any given defender, I think there are some things to watch out for here. There are some mitigations. And by the way, shout out to Recorded Futures InSec team. They always have great reporting and their stuff is worth reading. So that could be like guidance for gold guidance and grievances. But yeah, I think for this particular thing, I'm going to call this a 4.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, with using 4 a lot. Like, we don't want to fear monger.
Yeah, you're not going to
Tay,
lose
do you
like the
feel,
weekend over.
what about you, Tay?
Yeah, I was going to go around 4.5, somewhere call it like 4.27.
Okay.
I think the folding it under that larger group, the 102 group, is a little more advanced. And looking at some of the connected infrastructure here, there may be things cooking for that group that we can see, which is interesting. I think the report itself, you're right that the abuse of the Chrome TLS warning is a really interesting TTP to take away from this, and would not shock me to see that in broader use here if it's found to be effective. Yeah, we'll go with that.
All right. Thank you both for sharing both of those articles. And our listeners really appreciate it. Before we leave, though, today, we are going to head into the last segment of the show, which is our gold guidance and grievances. So, again, if you are a newer listener, first of all, thank you for listening. And we like to close our shows by sharing something good, any advice that we might have, and then anything that's bothering us. So that's our gold guidance and grievances, but we do it in the reverse order so we can end on the good note. Always good to do. It's too hard to come back from sending you away on the bad notes. Yeah.
And end on a bummer note.
No. So, Tim, we'll start with you. What are your gold guidance and grievances? Not in that order.
Yeah. So for starting with the grievances, look, where do I begin? There's a lot of heavy stuff going on right now. So I'm going to keep it in what I think for most people will agree it's the lighter realm of things, although it'll depend on how you feel about my grievance, which doesn't affect me personally that much, but I know it'll affect some people. And that is that Apple headphone adapters for the old style headphones into the newest phones are selling out and possibly never returning. So I do have one of those doohickeys. I was very upset about the headphone jack going away when it went away. I still wish it hadn't gone away. I do still use wired headphones sometimes. Over-the-ear headphones can be a nice way to listen to stuff. I think that's a bummer. So there's my grievance. But I think for most people that won't be catastrophic, but it's a bummer if you're in the Apple ecosystem. My guidance.
I just want to say I agree. I usually use like my knockoff AirPods, and when I hardwired with my regular earbuds, I'm like, wow, this sounds better. There is a difference, and it's
Yeah, and there are people out there who invest in really good over-the-ear headphones. And first of all, if they have Bluetooth ones, that's fine, but Bluetooth is probably not, there's a bit of degradation in the audio there, or latency in the audio if you are watching movies and so forth. Sometimes if the mouths and the sounds get out of sync, it can drive some people, myself included, a little bonkers. So there's that. But yeah, if you have really good wired headphones and you want to listen to sources on your phone, then you need one of these things if you're in the Apple world. So anyway, go get one of those while you can. So there's one guidance built in, but I'll shift to my main guidance. This is apropos nothing we've ever talked about, but it's just something I think people should consider. And that is, consider a cargo bike.
What is a cargo bike?
I live in a city where, first of all, biking is pretty popular. And there's also a sense of wanting to maybe lower our environmental footprint and so forth. There's a lot of people around here that feel that way. So a cargo bike is, if you haven't seen it, it's a bike. I first saw these in Europe years and years ago, and I saw them there long before I saw one in the States. But it's a bicycle, and some of them are electrified, but you can just have an old-fashioned pedal one too, where in front of your handlebars, there's a big box that can carry whatever stuff you want to put in it. And then the front wheel is ahead of that. So it's a profile of a bike that looks pretty different from the regular bikes we've all been riding around for a long time. But you can carry a lot of stuff. People put kids in those sometimes too, or dogs or other living things probably. But you can fit a lot of groceries in there or other stuff you may have to bring around. Yeah, you could put ET in there. ET could lie down in there. It actually would have been a really good way to hide ET if by piling a bunch of other stuff on top of him. That's a good point. But they're pretty cool. I've thought about getting one myself. I don't know where I would store it. That's one thing that would be a concern for me. And Seattle is a little tricky for these because it's very hilly and be hard to ride all that cargo up a hill if you don't have one of the electric assist models. But anyway, there's my guidance. Think about a cargo bike. My goal is not something new, but it's something I think it's important for us to be aware of. So maybe there's a built-in guidance with this one also to acquaint yourself with it. But the right to repair movement. We deal with so much consumer stuff that has planned obsolescence, there's the old sticker that I started seeing, I don't know, in childhood that says no user serviceable parts inside. And actually the right to repair movement goes back decades and decades, but it has got a lot of currency these days where people, for a whole lot of good reasons, are not happy about planned obsolescence and having to throw away devices and buy new ones after a certain period of time has gone by, or not being able to do maintenance on their own cars, which that's something I have always done and like to be able to continue to do. So I'm a big proponent of this movement, and I think it's worth folks being educated about it and doing advocacy around it.
Mhm.
Massachusetts has led the way in state right to repair laws, and I hope that other states are able to follow suit on that. So that's my goal. Not new, but very important.
Thanks, Tim. Tay, what about you? Your gold guidance and grievances, not in that order.
And just have a grievance and a guidance a little bit.
A lot of times these things blend together.
The NSO group, famous for making mobile malware and targeting dissidents and journalists and whoever pays them. They're in a court case right now with WhatsApp. So they're currently being sued by Meta, and there's a lot of discovery that's happening in this court case, and a lot of their emails are being published. And it's really interesting to see them like talking about the different WhatsApp vulnerabilities that they have stockpiled in a WhatsApp thread. Guidance there is to check that out, as well as a grievance, because they're still operating and there's still other companies just like them that are operating. So it's good to know their playbooks. And yeah, another like good news. I've got two bits of good news. One, FTC says that unwanted calls are down like 50% since 2021. That's cool. And then also folks are getting time in prison for stealing data. So we've got someone in Georgia, a 45-year-old in Georgia who's going to jail from Idaho, who's going to jail for 10 years for buying access to a Georgia clinic in 2017 and stealing the information of 100,000 people. So that person, the wheels of justice go very slow because this occurred in 2017, but they're getting 10 years for it. So I'll celebrate that.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
Yeah, we love seeing bad guys have bad days. So
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. These were great gold guidance and grievances, both of you. Thanks for sharing. All right, but that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in with us. Thank you, Tay and Tim, for being here again and sharing your insights. Be sure to stop back again next week for another all-new episode of Breaking Badness. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
thanks, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.